Welcome to my art channel and to this Paint With Me video. This sketchbook showed up for the first time in my How I Practice Portraits video from last week, and I've been obsessed with it since. It's a craft paper sketchbook by Hahnemuhle, and at first I was disappointed. I'd expected more of a toned drawing paper, but actual craft paper is very smooth and honestly doesn't work for sketching and shading with pencils all that well. But I've since found the perfect material for it and dove deeper into the Asaro Head model and a limited color palette. So grab your own sketchbooks, pencils and brushes and join me as we practice more portraits. The color palette I'm using is an adapted Zorn palette. What does that mean? The Zorn palette is made up of 4 colors: titanium white, ivory black, yellow ochre and vermilion or cadmium red. I don't have a cadmium red or vermilion gouache paint. That means I'm not using the traditional color combination here, though exact pigments would have changed over the course of history anyway. But my replacement actually gives me a wider color variety. I'm using 2 types of brushes, both by Da Vinci, from the Fit synthetic line. I found these perfect for my personal approach to gouache, where I combine dry gouache with wet gouache. Often I'll just use the white as a fresh color and just reactivate the dry color pans for everything else. These brushes have enough tension to use both wet and dry paint, can hold enough water to reactivate old paint, and are perfect for details. For larger application, I love this small flat in size 4. You can see that I've prepared a sketch here. It's a simple portrait, a companion for this sketch on the left page, but from a lower camera angle. That's something I usually find quite challenging. If you don't know what the Asaro Head model is, I just posted a video last week that shows my approach to it and why I find it helpful. I'm not following it exactly, but using it as a tool to understand the planes of the face I'm about to paint. Like I said, the craft paper isn't pleasant when shading or cross-hatching, too smooth for pencils to get a proper grip, but it serves perfectly well when sketching like this. I'm using a flame red Holbein gouache paint. This is the same pigment as Naphthol red, a bright red with cool undertones. Compared with the original paints, this gives the Zorn palette a wider range of temperatures. Usually the white and black would be the coolest tones and both the yellow ochre and red strictly warm. But the flame red has been amazing for mixing cooler pinks as well. The portrait sketch on the left actually leans heavily cool-toned, as I focused on mixing subtle grey tones and shades of pink. For this second one in this video, I want to push the exact same color palette towards a warmer result. It's so interesting to see how versatile even a very limited color palette can be. And you'll see how the craft paper itself plays into that, too. The Asaro Head and its sharp edges show me clearly where, in a simplified sketch, all the shadows should go, and I quickly blocked those in. Generally, I like to keep my shadows more saturated, at least in some areas. But the Zorn palette often leans more desaturated due to its inclusion of both black and white as key colors. While I like how harmonious that makes paintings look, I do try and keep some yellow ochre and red mixes to shine through, so the portraits don't look lifeless. With how quickly I painted over my guidelines, you might wonder, why make the effort of sketching in that Asaro Head model? I've been experimenting more and more with 3D models as reference. That's partially because of how AI-infested a lot of platforms sadly have become, so when I want a casual sketching session, I don't really know where I should turn to. And partially because of the freedom that gives me. I have complete control over lighting, poses, camera angles, and the more I play around in DAZ 3D, the easier it gets. It's also great for sketches like these that are connected thematically, as I can reuse the same model and scene, just adjusting pose and lighting. There's a downside though. Those models can look overly smooth and uncanny valley, especially if I just copy them. Having the reference image and then sketching it with the Asaro Head in my mind helped me understand the planes of the face better and gave me freedom to manipulate and emphasize shapes as I wished. Since the Asaro Head is so angular, it also counteracts some of that unnatural smoothness of the 3D models. I think this approach works for photo references just as well. It really just breaks down what we see into shapes that we can understand, and can be a great guide for direction in our brushwork. You'll see how I dab on more and more color as we go along, following those Asaro Head planes and angles. I'll get back to that in a bit, but wanted to chat about the craft paper first. Tone paper is great for color and value studies in general, giving us a base color to compare our mixed colors to. But here, in combination with the Zorn palette, I found it extra helpful. The beige tone of the paper is a great mid-tone for this palette, as if we'd mixed some yellow ochre, black and white together, with just a hint of red for a less greenish undertone. It's a shade so harmonious with this palette, we might as well have toned the surface of this paper ourselves to match it. This also saves time for sketches like this, as I don't have to cover everything with paint and from the start can evaluate my white highlights much better. I really recommend you give toned paper or canvas a try for your color studies, and craft paper in particular for the Zorn palette. At this point I layered more and more blobs of paint, but they are not as random as they might look. I'm placing them on the edges of plane changes, going back to the Asaro Head underneath. While my 3D reference has the basic light information for me to look at, with the cast shadow of the nose for example, or the bright shiny highlights, it's the Asaro Head that lets me invent all these values and hue changes. If you're ever not sure where to put more details in a sketch to make it look finished without it being overworked, I usually go for the parts closest to and facing the light source. Our eyes can't see details well in shadows, so those can stay simple, but from our point of view, left side of the face is closest to my light, and so that's where I carve out the details and create focus. I think it usually works pretty well and makes sure I'm not just detailing features like the mouth or eyes, which can look overly cartoonish. Like I mentioned in the beginning, the sketch on the left of this sketchbook spread focused on cool tones, while this one here is focused on warmer tones. I left more of that olive ochre shade shine through the layers of black and grey, and also really pushed the orange of her lips and around her eyes and nose. There's a simple breakdown of the color zones of the face that matches up well with the Zorn palette, by the way. Yellow ochre on the forehead and temples, the red dominating the mid-face area, and then grey tones mixed more heavily with the ivory black and titanium white to hint at those cooler shades in the jaw area. You can see I'm not using much water overall. This isn't a watercolor paper by any means, but it still held up well to my reactivated gouache paint. If you enjoy combining gouache sketches with colored pencils, I've got great news. The craft paper and its completely smooth surface are perfect for later touching up details. Here I'm using a Chroma Flow in the shade Strawberry and a Prismacolor in Burnt Sienna. I specifically use these to intensify my shadow saturation at the terminator line. The terminator is where our light area ends and the shadows begin, and it's a great area to emphasize with extra saturation as we see the true color of an object less influenced by the color of the light hitting it, but not yet drowned in shadow. The first page here that I flipped back to shows my struggle of getting started with this sketchbook a while ago. I'd wanted to sketch some portraits but disliked the shading and how shiny my pencils looked on this paper, and I ended up painting over one of those sketches, though you can still see hints of another head outline in the background. For this portrait in the center, I didn't use the Zorn palette, by the way. Instead, a Zorn palette plus blue. The scene itself was lit by a blue light, and so using cyan and some ultramarine blue made it contrast beautifully with the craft paper. That's when I realized I could use this sketchbook for color studies. I kept painting more of these late at night. That showed me a weak point of the craft paper. It's very tricky to film with a desk lamp on as it reflects the light weirdly and can mess with my white balance as well. But that's a filming issue, not a painting issue. Now, why would you want to paint with a limited color palette, specifically this Zorn palette? I went back to it for this small sketch in the bottom half of the page of Swan Sanche. As you can see, this color palette is a great fit for portraits over a wide range of skin colors, going from saturated and dark to complete white. What you lose in color variety is usually balanced by how cohesive a limited color palette can look. Sometimes I might wish for a hint of blue and can always drop that in for an actual painting, but for practice sketches it really simplifies color mixing. So for practice, I get to focus on the reference and the painting. Where do values shift? Where should I lean more towards yellow ochre or red in my mixes? Where to desaturate and where to saturate? It makes the spectrum of colors much more manageable. Now, while I said the Zorn palette is a great fit for a wide variety of skin tones, I have to admit that the gouache paint made it a bit more tricky. Gouache looks darker when wet, and so darker skin tones can look a bit muddy after drying. The grainier texture compared to watercolors can also make skin tones appear chalky or washed out. You can see me paint the shadows of this portrait multiple times. All these yellow ochre and white, mixed with just a hint of ivory black, blobs here made me appreciate that craft paper undertone again, as it tied everything together. Sofia Canedo is an amazing actress, and the cast and costume design is what inspired me to paint these little Wheel of Time sketches here. When I said at the beginning of this video that I've been a bit obsessed with Asaro Head sketches, well, I wasn't kidding, so here we go again. I brought up a 3D model of the Asaro Head and posted at very roughly the same angle as my reference, just as an extra guide. Here I ran into a few problems. My gouache setup is better for small sketches. the brushes were quite finicky for the size I wanted to paint in, but I also couldn't go much larger by diluting the paint more or the paper would start to warp. I took it slow, sketching in the facial features more hesitantly than before. I had my issues with the Wheel of Time show, definitely, and I'm also a few episodes behind still, but I really recommend it as a portrait reference source. You can find such a variety of diverse characters, and especially women of all ages, all in beautiful costumes and in gorgeous light setups. A lot of photography for women especially can lean more towards beauty lighting, which can wash out all those interesting details like skin texture that I like to paint. By the way, can you see that greenish ochre shade? That's a mix of the yellow ochre and ivory black. They get that olive undertone when mixed together, contrasting beautifully with the complementary reds and pinks. I'm actually itching to paint more movie or show-themed sketchbook pages for practice, maybe again in a limited palette. Lord of the Rings or The Expanse could be very fun, anything with a large cast of characters to pick from. Let me know if you have any suggestions. My 2 3D model portraits were studies for paintings I want to start sometime this month. I think these gouache color experiments will be really helpful even when I switch to canvas and acrylic paints for the actual portraits. And speaking of mixed media, I'd love to give the Zorn palette a try in watercolors, using the white of the paper instead of titanium white paint to mix, just to see if that different style compared to opaque paints works. Have you ever attempted that particular limited palette in watercolors? I remember being pretty tired when I painted these, as I'd just come back from a book fair weekend. There's something about gouache paint in particular that's so relaxing. Maybe because it looks so soft and muted and colors can be repainted easily. I just get to layer and mess around without any worry. Gouache paint is perfect for this layered approach. This is also why I use white paint fresh from the tube and reactivate everything else. The shadow colors don't need that opaqueness only fresh paint can give, but the white paint for highlights should have that extra creaminess to create a textured, detailed result. Shori Akdashlu is the whole reason I caught up with the show. I loved her so much as Christian Avasarala in The Expanse, which by the way is another great portrait reference source, though due to being set in mostly outer space, the lighting can be a bit harsher and more difficult to paint. Here she gets to wear amazing, extravagant costumes again, and I loved hinting at her gold earrings by dabbing heavy gouache paint all over this page. Rosamund Pike is ethereal as Moraine, so in a way using blue on her portrait only made her look out of this world here, at the center of the page. And I just really like how this series of portraits turned out. Having these costume details with their much more saturated colors also shows how desaturated I'd kept most of my skin tones in comparison. Just look at how bright that flame red looks on its own, or the yellow ochre and white together, compared to what I'd mixed for her skin. I finished this sketchbook page with some color swatches. Kind of the opposite of my usual approach, but I just thought they'd look neat and tie the page together. The 4 main colors of the Zorn palette at the bottom, and then in the top right corner a couple color mixes made from them to show the variety of what we can create. I hope you enjoyed my portrait practice session in gouache, spread out over multiple mornings and evenings. I feel like I learned a lot from these and can't wait to practice more. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again in my next art video.